The instant a narcissist figures out they can treat you badly and nothing happens as a result, the game is already lost. Not because you were too soft, but because you were following rules the other person never agreed to in the first place. Still, there's a small set of words, calm, short, and completely without emotional charge, that can flip the whole dynamic and change how a narcissist sees you from that point on. Stick with me to the end, and you'll know precisely what to say the next time someone tries to manipulate you, talk down to you, or control you. Have you ever left a conversation and thought, why didn't I say anything back there? Or replayed some disrespectful moment over and over in your head for days afterward? If that sounds familiar, drop a comment below, because this isn't about winning an argument, it's about breaking a cycle. Let's dig in. A narcissist's biggest weapon isn't charm, it's your hesitation. It's that urge to explain yourself, that hope that if you just phrase things the right way, they'll finally get how you feel. Here's the uncomfortable truth, though. They usually already understand exactly how you feel. They just don't rate your feelings as highly as they rate staying in control. That's why reasoning with them rarely works, and why boundaries, not debates, are the tool that actually gets results. Phrase number 1, that doesn't work for me. Here's something worth understanding about difficult, self-absorbed, or manipulative people. They often test your limits before they respect them. Many of us grow up believing that healthy relationships naturally include mutual consideration, honesty, and respect. We assume that if we are kind, patient, and understanding, the other person will respond in the same way. This belief is deeply connected to how we learn to form relationships from an early age. We are taught that kindness creates kindness, that empathy invites empathy, and that when we treat people with care, they will usually recognize that effort and return it. In emotionally healthy connections, this expectation often becomes reality. When two people genuinely value each other, there is an unspoken willingness to listen, compromise, and consider how their actions affect the other person. Mistakes happen, misunderstandings occur, and disagreements are inevitable, but there is usually a foundation of respect that allows both individuals to repair the damage. Neither person has to constantly prove their worth or fight to have their feelings acknowledged. However, many people carry this understanding into every relationship they enter, assuming that everyone operates from the same emotional framework. They believe that if they explain themselves calmly enough, love deeply enough, or remain patient long enough, the other person will eventually recognize their intentions. They approach conflict with the mindset of connection rather than competition. Their goal is not to win, it is to understand and be understood. This is where confusion often begins. Not everyone approaches relationships with the same values or emotional awareness. Some people have learned to view relationships through the lens of control, personal gain, or emotional survival. Instead of asking, how can we understand each other? They may unconsciously ask, how can I make this situation work in my favor? Instead of seeing boundaries as a natural part of closeness, they may interpret them as rejection or resistance. For someone who naturally gives understanding, this can become deeply exhausting. They keep offering more patience, hoping that patience will eventually create change. They explain their feelings more carefully, hoping the right words will finally create understanding. They forgive repeatedly, believing that another chance will allow the relationship to become what they imagined it could be. But the painful reality is that kindness alone cannot create emotional responsibility in another person. Your compassion can reveal your character, but it cannot force someone else to develop the same level of compassion. Your honesty can create an opportunity for connection, but it cannot guarantee that someone will respond honestly in return. Your patience can create space for growth, but it cannot do the growing for someone else. This is a difficult realization because many caring people naturally assume that conflict happens because they have not communicated well enough. They think, maybe I need to explain it differently. Maybe I need to be more understanding. Maybe if I give them more time, they will finally see how much I care. Sometimes better communication does help. Sometimes patience allows relationships to heal. But there comes a point where the issue is no longer a lack of explanation. The issue is a lack of willingness from the other person to acknowledge your experience. A person who respects you does not need to agree with every feeling you have in order to care about it. They may see situations differently, but they remain curious. They ask questions. They try to understand. They recognize that your emotions are real even when your perspective differs from theirs. Someone with unhealthy patterns may respond differently. They may dismiss your concerns, twist your words, shift blame, or make you feel as though having needs is the problem. Over time, this can create a confusing emotional environment where you begin questioning yourself more than you question the behavior that hurt you. You start measuring every sentence before speaking. You start minimizing your own feelings to avoid conflict. You start wondering whether asking for basic respect is somehow asking for too much. This is the quiet danger of relationships where mutual consideration is missing. The problem is not only the actions of the other person. The problem is that you may slowly begin abandoning your own inner voice in an attempt to preserve peace. Healthy relationships do require effort, but that effort should move in both directions. Love is not measured by how much one person can tolerate. Understanding is not proven by how much one person can sacrifice. A relationship becomes stronger when both individuals feel safe enough to be honest, express needs, and maintain their own sense of identity. The belief that kindness should be met with kindness is not wrong. It is actually a beautiful foundation for human connection. The lesson is not to become less caring or less compassionate. The lesson is to combine compassion with awareness. A generous heart still needs boundaries. A patient person still deserves respect. A person who understands others must also remember to understand themselves. Because the healthiest relationships are not created when one person endlessly gives and the other simply receives. They are created when two people recognize each other's humanity and choose, again and again, to treat that humanity with care. In emotionally healthy relationships, that expectation is often reasonable, but individuals with strong narcissistic or manipulative tendencies frequently approach relationships through a very different lens. Rather than seeing boundaries as normal expressions of self-respect, they may view them as obstacles to overcome, negotiations to win, or challenges to their influence. This doesn't mean every difficult person has a personality disorder, nor does every disagreement signal manipulation. Human relationships are complex, and everyone occasionally behaves selfishly or defensively. The important distinction lies in the pattern. When someone consistently dismisses your needs, ignores your comfort, or pressures you to abandon your own values for their benefit, boundaries become more than helpful. They become essential. That is why one of the most quietly powerful phrases you can learn is this: "That doesn't work for me." Notice what makes this statement so effective. It isn't aggressive, it doesn't accuse, it doesn't attack the other person's character or intentions. It simply communicates a personal limit. Instead of saying, "You're being unreasonable," or "You're always trying to control me," you're bringing the conversation back to something no one else has the authority to define: your own comfort, your own values, and your own choices. This phrase is remarkably difficult for manipulative people to argue with because it doesn't invite debate. It doesn't require you to prove your feelings or justify your decision. It simply states that the proposed behavior, request, or expectation is incompatible with your boundaries. Many people unknowingly weaken their boundaries by over-explaining them. They feel obligated to provide detailed reasons, hoping the other person will finally understand. But manipulative individuals often treat explanations as opportunities rather than conclusions. Every reason becomes another point to challenge. If you say, "I can't come because I'm tired," they might respond, "You'll feel better once you're here." If you say, "I'm busy this weekend," they might ask, "Can't you rearrange your schedule?" If you say, "I need some time to myself," they may insist, "You're just avoiding me." Suddenly, what should have been a simple decision becomes a lengthy negotiation.
Now compare that with, "That doesn't work for me." There is very little to negotiate. The statement isn't asking for permission. It isn't requesting approval. It is communicating a decision. This distinction matters more than most people realize.
Manipulative people often try to make you believe your boundaries need their approval, but a healthy boundary becomes valid the moment you choose it. Saying no does not make you selfish, and someone's disappointment does not mean you have harmed them. The phrase, "That doesn't work for me," protects your peace by avoiding guilt, over-explaining, and emotional manipulation. A respectful person may not always agree, but they will acknowledge your limit, while a controlling person will challenge your right to have one. Learning to use this phrase is not about becoming cold or emotionally distant. Healthy relationships require flexibility, compromise, and compassion. There will always be moments when you willingly adjust your preferences for someone you care about. Love often asks for generosity, but generosity loses its meaning when it becomes obligation. Kindness loses its beauty when it is extracted through guilt. Compromise stops being healthy when only one person is expected to compromise. Every lasting relationship depends on two people recognizing that both individuals matter equally. Your time matters, your energy matters, your emotional well-being matters, your comfort matters, and your boundaries matter. So the next time someone pressures you into something that violates your peace, remember that you don't have to construct a courtroom argument to defend your decision. You don't need permission to honor your own limits. Sometimes the most powerful response is also the simplest. That doesn't work for me. Those 5 words carry a quiet confidence. They communicate self-respect without hostility, firmness without aggression, and clarity without unnecessary conflict. They remind both you and the other person that healthy relationships are not built on one person constantly sacrificing themselves to maintain another person's comfort. They are built on mutual respect, honest communication, and the understanding that every individual has the right to decide what they will and will not accept. That simple sentence may not change a manipulative person, but it can change the role you choose to play in the relationship. And sometimes that is the most important transformation of all. They're essentially running an experiment, seeing how much they can get away with before hitting any pushback. That experiment shows up in small ways at first, talking over you, brushing off your opinions, cracking jokes at your expense, poking into your private life, expecting to be treated as special. None of it looks like much in isolation, but it's really them checking how much disrespect you'll quietly absorb. Why does this happen? Because boundaries only mean something once they come with consequences. A narcissist wants to find out if your limits are real or just talk. If you say something bothers you but keep tolerating it anyway, they file that away as "this boundary bends." And once they know that, the behavior tends to get worse because they're now confident nothing serious will happen if they push further. But when you respond the same calm way every single time, you're telling them without any theatrics that this particular line isn't up for negotiation. You don't need anger. You don't need threats. Honestly, big emotional reactions can sometimes hand them exactly the drama they were fishing for. What actually earns respect is predictability, showing up the same way every time. So if someone keeps taking a rude tone with you and you calmly step away from the conversation every single time it happens, they eventually learn that talking to you comes with strings attached. That lesson doesn't land through explanation. It lands through repetition. Over-explaining invites an argument. Being clear shuts it down. That idea matters even more once you're dealing with a narcissistic personality. Most of us were raised to believe that if we explain our reasoning well enough, the other person will get it and back off. That works fine in a relationship built on mutual respect. It doesn't work the same way here. A narcissist often isn't listening to understand you at all. They're listening for an angle, something to poke holes in, twist around, or use to undercut what you just said. Every extra detail you hand over becomes fresh material. Picture this. You turn down a request, then spend the next 5 minutes justifying why. A narcissist will often skip right past the actual decision and zero in on your reasoning instead. They'll question your logic, dig up exceptions, call you inconsistent, maybe even try to guilt you. Suddenly, the conversation isn't about your boundary anymore. It's about whether your reasons pass some invisible test. That shift is exactly what gives them leverage. The longer you defend yourself, the longer they get to keep the conversation alive and stay in the driver's seat. Clarity works completely differently. A clean, simple statement doesn't leave much to argue with because it's not an invitation to negotiate. Something like, "I'm not available, I've already decided," or "that doesn't work for me," gets your point across without handing over extra ammunition. It's about the outcome, not the case you're building to justify it. That keeps the whole thing from turning into a trial where you're stuck proving you deserve to make your own choice. People often worry that being brief comes off as cold. It doesn't. Being clear isn't the same as being harsh. It's actually confidence in its simplest form. You're not on the hook to convince anyone that your boundary is valid. Once you stop over-explaining, you close off the openings that manipulation relies on. Conversations get shorter, the pressure drops, and your decisions stay yours instead of turning into something up for debate. Confidence beats confrontation, and here's why. Narcissists are usually very good at handling confrontation. They expect it. They're ready for the raised voice, the accusations, the emotional blow-up, and honestly, that kind of conflict often works in their favor. It gives them attention, gives them something to engage with, and gives them a way to steer focus away from their own behavior. The second someone gets loud or aggressive trying to make a point, a narcissist can escalate right back, play the victim, deny everything, or twist the whole thing into a fight about who's really in the wrong. The original issue disappears into the noise. Confidence doesn't play that game. It doesn't need volume or intensity behind it. It comes from actually being settled in your own decisions and okay with your own limits. A confident person isn't trying to win every round or get everyone's approval. They can say no without feeling guilty, disagree without getting defensive, and step away from a pointless argument without needing to have the final word. That's a dynamic a narcissist has a much harder time working with. Part of why confidence lands so well is that it starves the interaction of emotional fuel. Narcissistic people are often chasing a reaction, some sign that they still hold power over how you feel. When they run into someone who stays composed and sure of themselves, a lot of their usual moves just stop working. Attempts to shame you or make you doubt yourself fall flat because you were never looking to them for validation to begin with. Real confidence also signals self-respect. It says your standards don't hinge on someone else's opinion of you. You don't need to dominate the room or tear the other person down to prove your worth. Your actions already speak for themselves. And that quiet, steady certainty tends to hit harder than any shouting match ever could. You don't need their agreement to hold a boundary, and that's a mental shift a lot of people find genuinely hard to make, especially with narcissistic individuals. We're taught that healthy communication runs on discussion, compromise, mutual give and take. That's true for balanced relationships. It becomes a trap, though, when you're dealing with someone who consistently steamrolls, challenges, or manipulates your limits. A lot of people put off enforcing a boundary because they're waiting for the other person to understand it, agree with it, approve of it, and a narcissist will happily use that hesitation against you. Here's the reality. A boundary was never a request for permission. It's a statement about what you personally will or won't put up with. Whether the other person thinks it's fair, reasonable, or justified has zero bearing on whether it stands. A narcissist might push back, mock it, accuse you of being selfish, insist you're overreacting, or demand you explain yourself at length. Those reactions can make it feel like your boundary isn't valid unless they eventually sign off on it. In truth, their approval was never required for it to exist. Say, for example, you've decided you'll leave any conversation where shouting starts. That boundary doesn't need the other person's blessing. They might demand you stay. They might claim you're dodging the real issue. They might get angry that things aren't happening on their terms anymore. None of that changes anything because the boundary is built around your behavior, not theirs. It was never your job to convince them it's the right call. It was only ever your job to actually follow through. A lot of people mix up boundaries with negotiations, but negotiations need two people willing to participate. A boundary only needs you. The moment you stop waiting for a green light to protect your own peace, time, and emotional energy, you take back ownership of your own choices and reactions. If any of this is landing with you, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, not to feed an algorithm, but because learning to spot manipulation can genuinely reshape your relationships. And if you've ever actually used one of these lines and had it work, drop your story in the comments. It might help someone else who needs to hear it. Let's keep going. The less emotional fuel you hand over, the less power they have over you. It's a simple but important principle because a lot of narcissists run on emotional reactions. Their sense of control is often tied directly to how much influence they have over your mood, whether that's anger, frustration, guilt, or fear. Strong reactions become proof in their mind that they still have access to your inner world. That's part of why small disagreements can spiral into long, draining fights. The real goal usually isn't resolving anything, it's provoking a response. When they push a button and get a big reaction out of you, they learn something valuable. Which topics get under your skin, which insecurities are easiest to poke, which tactics actually work. Once they've mapped those pressure points, they'll keep hitting them because they know they're effective. In a way, every strong emotional reaction hands them a blueprint for how to manipulate you next time. That doesn't mean bottling everything up or pretending things don't hurt. Feelings are real and they matter. What matters just as much is where and how you let them out. Reacting on impulse in the moment usually strengthens their hand. Responding thoughtfully instead keeps the control with you. Staying calm, keeping your responses short, and holding a clear boundary gives them almost nothing to work with. If someone insults you trying to bait an argument, blowing up emotionally can drag the whole thing out. But a calm line like, "I'm done with this conversation," followed by actually walking away, takes away whatever payoff they were hoping for. Without the drama, the whole interaction just loses steam. People sometimes mistake this kind of self-control for weakness. It's actually the opposite. It shows your behavior is coming from your own values, not from someone else pulling your strings. Short, firm statements beat long-winded defenses because narcissistic people are experts at turning any conversation into a chance to seize control. Most of us were taught that the more thoroughly we explain ourselves, the more likely we are to be understood and respected. That's true in a healthy relationship. With a narcissist, it usually backfires. Every extra sentence is one more thing they can pick apart, question, or twist into a weapon against you. When you go into a long defense of your choice, you're basically inviting them into a debate. Instead of your boundary being the topic, your reasoning becomes the topic. They'll poke at the details, hunt for inconsistencies, or pressure you into justifying yourself even further. Before long, you're defending your own feelings, your priorities, even your basic right to make a decision, and the goalposts just keep sliding no matter how solid your argument is. Short, direct statements stop that cycle before it starts. Something like, "No, that doesn't work for me. I've made my decision," or "I'm not going to keep discussing this," gets your point across without opening any new doors. It's clear, it's final, and there's simply less to argue with because there's less material on the table. People worry brevity will look rude, but firmness isn't hostility. You can be perfectly respectful while still keeping things short. The goal was never to shut the other person up. It's to avoid getting dragged into an endless back and forth designed to wear you down. Shorter, simpler words also project confidence. They tell the other person and honestly remind you that you trust your own judgment and don't need anyone's sign-off to make a decision. When your language gets simpler and your boundaries get clearer, conversations stop drifting into arguments meant to grind down your resolve. Respect starts the moment access becomes conditional. That's a reality a lot of people only figure out after years of being treated poorly. Narcissistic people tend to take for granted whatever comes to them for free. If they can repeatedly disrespect you, manipulate you, criticize you, or ignore your limits and still keep getting your time, attention, and emotional energy anyway, they have absolutely no reason to change. In their mind, the relationship just keeps rolling regardless of how they behave. So the disrespect stops being a one-off and turns into a pattern. Your attention, your presence, your trust, your energy, these are things you're choosing to give, not things anyone is entitled to. Healthy relationships understand that. Narcissistic people, though, often treat it as owed to them by default. That's exactly why simply asking for better treatment tends to fall flat. Words don't shift behavior much when there's no real cost attached to that behavior. Making access conditional doesn't mean turning controlling or punishing. It means understanding that your presence in someone's life should come with an expectation of mutual respect attached. If someone keeps insulting you during conversations, maybe you start ending the conversation the moment it happens. If they keep crossing your boundaries anyway, maybe you scale back contact. If they consistently ignore your limits, maybe they simply don't get the same access to your time and energy anymore. All of that sends one message. Staying close to you requires being treated with respect. Consistency is what makes this actually work. A boundary you enforce one day and let slide the next has no teeth. When the consequences are predictable, people learn certain behavior just won't get rewarded with unlimited access. A lot of narcissists may never truly grasp your feelings, but they do pick up on patterns. Once disrespect leads to less access instead of more attention, the whole dynamic shifts. Your time and energy stop being something they can take for granted and start being something they actually have to be careful with. Your willingness to walk away changes everything because it removes one of the biggest sources of power a narcissist can hold over you, the assumption that you'll stick around no matter how badly you're treated. A lot of manipulative people push boundaries because they've decided there's basically no risk in doing it. They expect that after the arguing, the guilt trips, the criticism, things will just go back to normal like nothing happened. That expectation is exactly what gives them the confidence to keep repeating the same behavior. So if there's one thing worth holding on to from all this, it's this. Narcissists don't change because you finally found the perfect argument, the perfect explanation, or the perfect emotional appeal. They change when the old tricks stop working. The moment you stop over-explaining, stop asking permission to have limits, stop feeding conflict that doesn't need to happen, and start backing your words up with consistent action, the whole dynamic starts to move. Remember, your power was never about getting them to respect you. Your power has always been in deciding what you will and won't put up with. Every boundary you actually hold, every calm response instead of a reaction, every time you walk away from disrespect, all of it sends a message about your worth, not through anger, not through payback, but through self-respect. And that's something most people only realize after a lot of wasted time. Respect isn't something you beg for, bargain for, or earn by constantly sacrificing yourself. It starts the second you recognize your own worth and start acting like it. Because once someone realizes they can't manipulate your emotions anymore, can't ignore your boundaries, can't take your presence for granted, they're forced to see you in a completely different light. The point was never to change the narcissist. It was always about taking back the control they had over you. And once you reach that place, once your peace matters more than their approval, once your boundaries matter more than their opinions, once your self-respect stops being negotiable, you'll notice something. The person who changed the most wasn't them.